honored that you have come to listen to my story, and I'm most grateful to my husband, Harold, and our beautiful family, their awareness of Judaism, and our love of Israel. My life has been an amazing journey. I survived in large part through luck and the kindness of strangers. I could be considered a victim, but I chose not to. Instead, I advocate for Jewish causes and Israel on behalf of all of those voices that were killed and can no longer speak for themselves. A recent article referred to me as an activist, while not the label I put on myself, is probably a fair description. In commemorating Yom HaShoah here with you, I would like to discuss my experiences in Nazi Germany and Shanghai, China, including my 10 years as a stateless refugee. But just as the Holocaust and the state of Israel are inextricably linked, Israel has long been important to me as a homeland, a refuge of last resort, and the place many of my relatives call home. You will forgive me if I skip a few details along the way. I have many memories, but I wrote this speech down since my grandchildren have always said, brevity is not my strong suit. Please ask any questions you might have during or after the Kiddush luncheon. I was born in Celle, near the industrial city of Hanover in northern Germany. During Kristallnacht, the night of the broken glass, in 1938, authorities took my stepfather to a concentration camp. My mother could only get him out on the premise that he leave the country within 48 hours. He was in possession of a visa to the United States, but his quota number had not come up. My mother found out that my family could go to Shanghai, China, without any documentation. After my stepfather's departure for Shanghai, my mother tried to salvage what she could of her assets and belongings, sending some furniture, inventory, and clothing out of Germany, since one was not allowed to send money. Years later, my mother told me that she did send money out of Germany with whomever she thought would be an honest broker. The Gestapo came to investigate her on 3 occasions. Only once did they find her at her home and take her to headquarters. As it happened, she had several receipts in her purse for money sent out. She asked the Gestapo interrogators if she could go to the bathroom, where she then flushed her receipts down the toilet. What luck, she said. God was with her at that moment. Without the receipts, however, she was never able to retrieve the money. To leave the country, my mother had to buy round-trip, first-class tickets from the German steamship liner Norddeutsche Lloyd, even though they knew we were never coming back. We left Germany in February of 1939. I was almost 4, and my brother was 10. We went overland by train to Genoa, Italy, with passports that had a very large red capital J printed on the front cover. Everyone, from conductors to local authorities, would know we were Jews. Once aboard the ship, we sailed from Naples to Port Said, where my mother wired her older sister, who lived in Palestine, to get us ashore. The British refused us entry. Our journey then took us from Aden and around the Arabian Peninsula, Mumbai, Colombo, Ceylon, which is now Sri Lanka, Singapore, Hong Kong, and finally Shanghai, a month later on March 20th, 1939. Shanghai was an open city. Anyone could enter for a small landing fee. A byproduct of the mid-1800s Opium Wars, during which China handed over Shanghai to the British-led Western powers. Shanghai was divided into 3 jurisdictions: the international settlement, the French concession, and a small walled-in area under Chinese control. Each jurisdiction had its own laws. Hongqiu, later the ghetto, was a bombed-out, poverty-stricken area, which the Chinese and Japanese fought over in 1937. I will be speaking about the war years, which came after Shanghai's glory days as the Paris of the Orient. The wealthy Sephardi community built the infrastructure of the Shanghai Jewish community. They were former Iraqi, Syrian, and Egyptian Jews who became British citizens and settled in colonial India. They made their money in the opium trade, real estate, and banking, and spread out to Shanghai and Hong Kong. They built the synagogues, hospitals, and schools, and helped about 18,000 Jewish refugees from Europe. Shanghai in the 1940s had 22,000 Jews total. Shanghai was considered the most crime-ridden city in the world. It was only for the sturdy. There were epidemics of cholera, smallpox, yellow fever, whooping cough, which I almost died of, and malaria, which my brother took sick with for many a year. My uncle and many others died of dysentery since the water was full of bacteria. There were hardly any toilets. They used chamber pots, which were put by the wayside every morning to be emptied. Can you imagine the stench? Beggars lived on the streets, many times starving to death. In winter they froze, and one could see their dead bodies lying by the curbs to be picked up in the morning. Pickpockets and beggars in Shanghai were united in guilds, and rickshaw coolie operators carried 3 or 4 people at a time, all day long, in rain or shine, and extreme temperatures. Their lives were short-lived. Add to that bicyclists, pedicabs, plus the occasional well-dressed Chinese or foreigner, along with electric streetcars trying to run. And yes, there were also the Indian policemen with their red turbans trying to direct traffic. Amidst all this, my classmates and I walked through these narrow streets to and from school, trying to avoid the bombings, especially later in the war years. Shortly after our arrival in Shanghai, my mother used the money she received of the sales of her belongings and opened up a tailoring store in the main street of the international settlement. She hired Chinese tailors, and she went to the consulates selling suits made to order. My mother spoke 5 languages, one of them being English, which helped a lot, as that was the language of the city. She also did some work with rental properties, thereby earning some commissions. We were lucky in having a small place to live in the French concession, as my stepfather had arrived prior to our coming and procured the rental. My mother had a pair of beautiful ornate silver candlesticks that she smuggled out of Germany. She often pawned them so we could survive. On one occasion, it was a struggle to get them back from the pawn shop. She was a day late in retrieving them and cried in front of the pawnbroker before he sold them back to her. I still have these candlesticks with all the memories they represent. They were originally given to my mother by her grandmother, and I have since given them to my daughter. She has them prominently displayed and uses them for special occasions. I was placed in pre-kindergarten school and later in the Shanghai Jewish School. The school was run under the British system by the Sephardic community. Graduates sought to complete the Cambridge examinations, which would allow one to go to university. Essentially, it was a Jewish day school. We started every assembly by saying the Shema. Teachers traveled between classrooms, and when one arrived, we all stood up till he or she told us to sit down. All our subjects were compulsory, and everybody needed to get over the 50 percentile mark to reach the next grade. We had intramural sports such as soccer, field hockey, and gymnastics. My small frame was particularly helpful for the top of the gymnastics pyramids. There were plays and musicals, and we had assemblies for all the Jewish holidays. We also had many afternoon social clubs. To this day, my classmates and I are still in communication. I joined B'tah, Brit Trumpeldor, a Zionist youth organization, as it was the popular thing to do. We sang Hebrew songs, learned about Palestine, and were inspired to become chalutzim, pioneers. As stateless refugees, we always dreamed of a homeland. After Pearl Harbor in 1941, the Japanese took over Shanghai and interned all the British and American citizens. Initially, they left the Jews alone. It was also at this time that my stepfather died from complications of diabetes and tuberculosis. It left my mother alone to carry on with 2 small children. In February of 1943, the Japanese, coerced by their German allies, told all immigrants that came to Shanghai after 1937 to move to a restricted area of 1 square mile in Hongqiu. The area was already overcrowded with 100,000 poverty-stricken Chinese, plus all the refugees who had moved there upon arrival. We were lucky when my mother could give us a bowl of rice a day. Sometimes the cafe a few doors down had grinds that were left over from their coffee pot. My mother was elated to have them for a cup of watered-down coffee. In Hongqiu, we were under the control of a Japanese administrator who called himself King of the Jews. He was a psychotic tyrant who used to rave and rant at people. In order to leave the ghetto for jobs, Jews over the age of 13 needed a pass from him. Depending on his mood, you could get your pass, get hit across your face, or be flung across the room. One day, my mother did not get her pass to go to a store now in the French concession. She asked me, an 11-year-old, to go to the store and try to sell whatever I could. While there, I noticed 2 men were standing across the street leaning on a lamppost. As I watched them, the telephone in the back room rang, and while I answered the phone, they robbed the store of everything in it. So much for helping my mother out. The Jews of the ghetto worked to develop a community. They set up committees to administer to the needs of refugees. Monetary help came from the American Jewish Joint, and some help came from the Russian Jews who still lived outside the ghetto in Shanghai. There was a street in the ghetto they called Little Vienna. It had a bakery store, a coffee shop, a hairstylist, and a small grocery store. I remember vividly that the store also had candies and chocolates. Of course, we had no money to buy such luxuries. Perhaps that's why I'm a chocoholic now and a lover of desserts of any kind. We had in the ghetto a number of newspapers that were published in several languages. Journalists and actors ran theater and radio shows. Refugee musicians gave concerts, and there were dances for the younger folks. They sometimes occurred on our rooftop, where my mother also cooked and washed clothes. Towards the end of the war years, we were bombed by B-29s that flew over from Okinawa. The Japanese put many of their ammunition dumps around the ghetto, and on cloudy days, the planes often missed their target and hit the ghetto. Many, many died. Shanghai was built on mud flats, and there were no basements or bomb shelters to hide in. so the only places of safety were under the stairs or on the first floor. One really never knew whether one would live from 1 hour to the next. It took me years to get over the fright of hearing the air raid sirens or any type of sirens. Once the atomic bomb destroyed Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we feared Shanghai could be the next target. Many high-ranking German emissaries told the Japanese to do the same with Jewry as they did in Europe. What saved us was a myth from the entirely fabricated protocols of the Elders of Zion, which said that the Jews control the banks. Additionally, Jacob Schiff, a Jewish financier and philanthropist, loaned the Japanese government huge sums of money during the Russian-Japanese War of 1904-1905 because earlier the Russians had murdered his entire family in pogroms. It was enough to substantiate the banking myth for the Japanese generals should they need to obtain loans to sustain their war effort, and it did save us. It took us 3 years to find refuge after the war ended in 1945. The communists surrounded Shanghai, and Mao let it be known that he did not want any foreigners. The communists hung dead bodies in villages on the outskirts of Shanghai because those Chinese villagers did not want to adhere to the new communist doctrines and ideology. Once again, no one wanted to have the few remaining stateless Jewish refugees emigrate to their lands. My mother registered at every foreign consulate. My wish was to go to Israel. But through HIAS, the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, we were able to go to the United States on a group visa. The American Jewish organizations assured the U.S. government that they would shelter and take care of the refugees who could not sustain themselves. I am forever grateful to the American Jewish community. I have given much time and effort back to this kind of generosity that was afforded me in my time of substantial need. In conclusion, as a now proud American Jew, I still and always will feel that Israel is of prime importance to me. In my view, it is of absolute necessity, supporting and having a Jewish homeland. Should anything ever happen again, Jews could always go to Israel and have an army and a strong nation to defend them. And above all else, I want my children and grandchildren to remember who they are. We will always, no matter what, be Jews, and proud Jews at that. Thank you, and again, Shabbat Shalom.
I'm going to take the liberty of asking Helen one question. Could you describe how you got to America and how you arrived? Was it ship, plane? What was that like?
Yes, the hires arranged to have us go by boat. It was on a American troop ship, and there was about 1,000 of us in steerage. And it brought us from Shanghai to the Philippines, which Manila was totally bombed out. And then we came to Paradise, which we stopped in Honolulu, and then to San Francisco. The voyage itself was, what should I say, worse than horrendous, because we all lived in the steerage together and with no privacy at all. I remember when I came to San Francisco, I had gotten lice in my hair. I mean, it was not good. But we came to San Francisco, and the Jewish community, Jewish Family and Children's Service, helped us. They had suggested that it would be easier for us to go inland as opposed to staying in San Francisco. But it wasn't my choice to make a decision. My brother wanted to become an engineer, and he needed to go to the university, so they had suggested Minneapolis, Minnesota. I don't know, my friend Hopes are here, but at the time when we arrived in Minneapolis, it was considered the anti-Semitic capital of the United States. But that's how we got there. I'll be happy to answer any and all questions. It's difficult to put 10 years of your life into a 15 or 20-minute talk. So please ask me at the Kiddush luncheon. Thank you.